thanks so much for your time, buddy.
My pleasure.
This it's weird and wonderful in kind of equal measures. I got to start by asking, were you able to steal Excalibur from the set?
No, and I mean, now I wish I had. I've since learned the value of taking props and stealing them off the prop truck. And in fact, I've got a sword right here. This is from the movie I just finished. I made sure I took this one. This is from Peter Pan.
Oh,
but there's a bunch of props that, including the axe. I don't have the axe either. I'm like, why didn't I take the axe? But anyway, I regret that. I wish I had more props for my movies.
Could be perfect for the living room. This is based on that 14th century poem. When did you first read it, and did you always believe from that point that you were destined to make a fantasy film of some sorts?
I knew from the very early stages of my career, which began when I was 7 years old, that I wanted to make a fantasy film at some point, because I loved that genre as a child. I loved adventure movies. I loved Arthurian epics. I liked the sword and sorcery genre. And so I knew at some point I probably would dip my toes into that. And I didn't know when or where. But I'd read Sir Gawain and the Green Knight in college, in university. And I always liked it. It was like something that just kind of like stuck with me. And whenever I would think about, making a medieval film or a movie about a knight on a quest, that story would always pop into my head. And it wasn't like nagging at me, demanding that I adapt it, but it was just always was there. It was always just hanging about. And then one day in 2018, I just decided I was going to write a movie about a knight on a horse. and the poem came back to me, and I was like, I'm going to reread it and see if there's anything there. And I just started to adapt it, and one thing led to another.
Well, these are the sorts of kind of adventures and quests that you always wanted to have, as a kid. You try to recreate and reimagine, I suppose, in some ways. What I do love about this, you use a lot of practical effects. You've got matte paintings. You've got Ralph Ineson actually in prosthetics makeup of some kind. How important was it for you to do that and and kind of try and stay away from digital as much as possible?
For this film in particular, I really wanted it to have a more old-fashioned approach. I wanted to try to do as much practically as we could, but I also wasn't ever going to shy away from digital. There are so many times on set where you're shooting something and something's not quite right, like the sky doesn't look right, and I'm just like, don't worry, we'll fix the sky later. We can put another sky in, it'll be fine. So I'm always quick to turn to digital when I know I can use it to make the movie better. But I also am always going to try to do things practically if I can, as with The Green Knight. And then with this movie, I wanted it to harken back to those fantasy films I loved as a child, which had a very specific type of visual effect in it, particularly with the matte paintings and that matte painting aesthetic. And so that was something we really decided early on that we were going to embrace. And even when the matte paintings are digital, we still tried to make them look hand painted. There's one that my brother did that was painted, but the rest of them were digital versions of them. But we still, the way they're composited in, we tried to make them as old fashioned as possible. And the giants, we tried to do, the giants are just, we shot people on blue screen and then put them into a real background that we shot on set or on location. And that's how you would have done that in, the 80s. It's exactly the same technique.
Yeah.
So really the only big digital effect that is noticeable is the fox, which is a very modern, that's like state of the art CG from Weta. And that was the best tool for that job. Like we could have built a puppet or we could have done an animatronic. It would have been too expensive for our budget to do that properly. And I just knew that for what we were trying to do and what the best way about it was to do that digitally. And so you just always you think about what are the best ways to achieve something. But if I can do something practically, I'll always start there.
I think it always shows. I always love that. Like you see it in, like Star Wars, you see it in Indiana Jones, even, in stuff like RoboCop, they have, matte paintings, which is, really cool. So it's always refreshing, to see that kind of pop up, every so often. Obviously, digital is the kind of main thing now.
It is, and it's something that someday I will make a movie with a traditional glass matte painting in it. I promise. So that's my goal. I I've talked to the artists about how to do it. I know how to pull it off, and one of these days we'll do that.
What I think was pretty stunning in this was the lighting in a lot of the scenes. It looks stunning. It looks very precise, obviously very deliberate. Was that something that you mapped out in a storyboard? From kind of day one of your vision, that you wanted very specific lighting for specific scenes.
Yeah, definitely, and also in terms of like the color of that lighting and how that color evolves, and so the initial approach was always like err towards naturalism, but don't be afraid to step into something more fantastical or more surreal in terms of the aesthetic. And you see that with the Great Hall, the opening scene with in where he meets the Green Knight, where it begins with just like daylight coming through windows, but also with this big beam coming through that like flares out the lenses a certain way.
Yeah.
And then as the scene progresses, the light changes, and it goes from being a much more naturalistic approach to something far more heightened. And there are different colors of magic throughout that scene. So when the Green Knight first enters, there's the light that occurs when Merlin, tries to figure out who he is, and that was a lighting cue. And then when the Queen reads the letter, that light that changed to that light. And then for the final battle with Gawain, the light becomes much more focused. So all that's planned out in advance, and as much as we can. It's always like we're always figuring it out on the set. We try as much as we can. And then over the course of the rest of the movie, there's a gradual like decrease in that sort of artificiality, and it gets more and more naturalistic as it goes on. And lenses play a big part of that too, like choosing which lens to use. And the lenses we use towards the end of the movie are very distinct, and they handle light differently. So all of that is stuff that Andrew and I will map out in advance. But then we also just follow our instincts a lot of the time. Like we'll just be on set and see something or feel something and just make a choice. And that choice will ultimately, on an instinctual level, be correct, but it's something we could never have like sat down in a room 3 months earlier and planned out.
I must say, Dev Patel, Ralph, Ineson, were great. The whole cast were great. What made these two guys, ideal and perfect for these roles? And specifically about Ralph, I understand you watched him, back when he was in The Office. How much did you like, that character back then?
It was funny because like when I first saw Ralph in The Witch, I didn't connect him to The Office. Like it just didn't connect at all. And I was like, and after I saw The Witch, I was like, oh goodness, who's this actor? And I went and looked. I was like, oh, of course. And I should have known. And I made a note then. I was like, I want to work with Ralph at some point. This guy is incredible. And I was delighted to see him, in The Last Jedi, and a brief moment there. Like, every time I'd see him, I'd just be reminded I needed to work with him. And when we were casting the Green Knight, looking for an actor for the Green Knight, and we weren't sure at first how to pull off the character. I was like, I wanted him to be big and imposing, and obviously he was going to be under a lot of prosthetics. And I thought maybe we need to get a stunt person or someone who's used to performing under like mountains of makeup, or maybe there's like a puppet. We were like, maybe we'll do part of it animatronic. We weren't quite sure how. And at a certain point down that development process, I was like, the thing that I'm getting away from here is the performance. Like I'm getting caught up in the aesthetics of what he looks like, but in truth, the reality is he needs to be an incredible actor. And all of a sudden, I just thought about Ralph. I was like, oh wait, Ralph is already, he's a tall man. He has an incredibly imposing voice, but he has a sense of humor. Going back to The Office, he's got that sense of humor.
Yeah.
I wanted the Green Knight to have a twinkle in his eye and have a sense of humor about him. And so instantly, like I was like, just quickly, we just like ran to my producer's office, like we need to reach out to Ralph Ineson. And we put in a call to his agent. I got on the phone with him, and I mean, thankfully he was available and was excited to do it. But he brought everything I wanted. He brings that physicality. He can ride a horse. He can wield an axe. He can do all of those things. But when he smiles, there's that warmth to him, and he knows how to bring that out through the makeup, which is a real challenge. There was so much prosthetics on him, so much makeup, but he was able to act through that, and that's a skill that I do not take lightly. Like I don't know how he does it.
And just one final question before you go, David. You showed at the start, that sword from Peter Pan and Wendy. what can you tell us about that experience, and what can you share with us?
I think that it's going to be a great movie. I mean, we just finished shooting, so I'm in the edit now. I'm overjoyed with it. It was a really long shoot, but it was a joyful shoot, and I think that joy is going to come through on screen. This is Willow saying hello, and it'll come out sometime next year. I don't know when, but I'm overjoyed with that movie.
Well, I hope you don't get a phone call from Disney asking for that sword back. So we'll just keep this.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Well, David, thanks so much. Best luck with the movie's release. Thanks a lot for your time. Okay.
Thanks so much, Thomas.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're watching Hey You Guys.
Hey You Guys, huh?
Hey, you guys.
Is that from the Goonies?
It is indeed, yeah.
Nice.
Hey!